Welcome, history enthusiasts, to a tale of two worlds colliding, a story of ambition, conquest, and the tragic fall of a magnificent empire. Today, we delve into one of the most pivotal moments in human history, the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire. Imagine, if you will, the vast, shimmering expanse of Mesoamerica in the early 16th century. For centuries, the Aztec Empire, or the Triple Alliance as it was truly known, had risen to prominence, its capital, Tenochtitlan, a marvel of engineering and urban planning built on an island in Lake Texcoco. With an estimated population of over 200,000, it was one of the largest cities in the world, rivaling even the great European capitals of its time. The Aztecs were masters of agriculture, developing sophisticated chinampas, or floating gardens, that allowed them to cultivate crops with incredible efficiency, sustaining their massive population. Their society was highly structured, with a complex religious system that permeated every aspect of life, demanding human sacrifice to appease their gods, particularly Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun. Their scientific understanding, while different from European traditions, was profound. They developed a sophisticated calendar system, remarkably accurate in its astronomical observations, and possessed advanced knowledge of herbal medicine and surgical techniques. Their architectural prowess is evident in the towering pyramids and intricate temples that adorned Tenochtitlan, a testament to their engineering skills and their ability to mobilize vast amounts of labor. This was a civilization at its peak, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, a storm that would arrive not from the heavens, but from across the vast ocean, carried by strange ships and even stranger men. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a different world was burgeoning, fueled by the age of exploration and a fervent desire for wealth, power, and religious conversion. Spain, newly unified and emboldened by the Reconquista, was at the forefront of this movement. The New World, as they called it, promised untold riches, gold, silver, and new lands to claim in the name of God and crown. The Spanish conquistadors, a breed of hardened soldiers and adventurers, were driven by a potent mix of religious zeal, lust for gold, and a yearning for glory. Their worldview was shaped by centuries of warfare against the Moors, making them formidable and ruthless fighters. They possessed technologies unknown to the Americas: steel weapons, gunpowder, cannons, and horses. These were not just tools of war, they were symbols of a vastly different scientific and technological trajectory. The compass, the astrolabe, and advanced shipbuilding techniques had allowed them to traverse vast oceans, a feat unimaginable to the Aztecs. Their understanding of metallurgy, chemistry, in the form of gunpowder, and animal husbandry, horses, gave them a significant, albeit often misunderstood, advantage. The stage was set for an unprecedented encounter, a collision of two completely disparate civilizations, each with its own strengths, weaknesses, and scientific understandings. The consequences of this meeting would forever alter the course of history, leaving an indelible mark on both cultures and shaping the world we know today. Omens and arrival. For years leading up to the Spanish arrival, the Aztec Empire was plagued by a series of unsettling omens and portents. Accounts from indigenous sources describe strange celestial phenomena, like a flaming torch appearing in the sky, believed to be a comet. Modern astronomy allows us to understand that comets are celestial bodies made of ice and dust, and their appearance can indeed be dramatic. For the Aztecs, however, these were not merely scientific curiosities, but divine messages, interpreted by their priests as warnings of impending disaster. Lake Texcoco, usually calm, was said to have boiled and foamed, with waters rising and houses being swept away. This could potentially be attributed to seismic activity or unusual weather patterns, but again, within the Aztec worldview, it held profound spiritual significance. Eerie cries were heard in the night, and strange birds with mirrors on their heads were reportedly seen, reflecting the stars. These were not simply superstitious fears. They were deeply embedded in their understanding of the cosmos and their place within it. The Aztecs, like many ancient civilizations, possessed a sophisticated understanding of cycles and patterns in nature, but they interpreted these deviations from the norm through a religious lens. Their calendar, while incredibly accurate, was also intertwined with prophecies and the belief in recurring cycles of creation and destruction. These omens fostered a sense of unease and vulnerability within the empire, a psychological susceptibility that would be exploited by the arriving Spaniards. In 1519, the ominous prophecies seemed to materialize with the arrival of Hernan Cortés and his small fleet of 11 ships on the coast of what is now Veracruz. Imagine the shock and awe of the indigenous people witnessing these massive vessels, unlike anything they had ever seen. The ships themselves were marvels of European shipbuilding technology, incorporating centuries of accumulated knowledge in navigation, carpentry, and sail design. These were not simple canoes. They were ocean-going vessels capable of carrying hundreds of men and supplies across vast distances. The sight of these floating mountains and the strange, pale-skinned men emerging from them, accompanied by powerful beasts, horses, and wielding thunderous weapons, cannons, must have been truly terrifying. Cortés, a cunning and ambitious conquistador, had a clear objective: to find gold and claim new lands for Spain. He understood the psychological impact of his arrival and masterfully used it to his advantage. He meticulously gathered intelligence, learning about the political landscape of the region, the rivalries between different indigenous groups, and the immense wealth of the Aztec Empire. His initial encounters with the local Totonac people were crucial, as they had long resented Aztec dominance and saw the Spaniards as potential liberators. This early alliance would prove to be a pivotal factor in the unfolding conquest, demonstrating Cortés's shrewd understanding of local power dynamics. The stage was now set for the direct confrontation between these two disparate worlds, a confrontation that had been foretold by omens and was now physically manifest on the shores of Mesoamerica. Cortés's Gambit. Upon landing, Cortés faced a critical challenge, solidifying his position and ensuring the loyalty of his men. Many of his soldiers, having endured a perilous journey across the Atlantic, were eager for quick riches and considered retreating if the going got tough. Cortés, however, was not one to turn back. In a daring and decisive move, he deliberately scuttled his own ships. While often dramatically portrayed as burning his ships, historical accounts suggest he systematically dismantled them, reusing the materials for construction. But the effect was the same. There was no turning back. This act, a brilliant psychological maneuver, eliminated any possibility of retreat and instilled a desperate resolve in his men. It was a commitment device, a stark declaration that their only path forward was through conquest. Scientifically, the act of dismantling the ships showcased practical engineering skills, maximizing resources in a hostile environment. The iron fittings, sails, and timbers were far too valuable to simply burn. This move solidified his leadership and eliminated internal dissent. It forced his small contingent of around 500 men, 15 horses, and a handful of cannons to focus entirely on the task ahead. This small band of Europeans, armed with steel and gunpowder, was now fully committed to venturing into the heart of a vast and powerful empire. Their success would hinge not just on their weaponry, but on their ability to exploit existing political tensions and their audacious determination. One of Cortés's most crucial assets was not a weapon or a horse, but a woman named Malinche, later known as Doña Marina or La Malinche. She was a Nahua woman who had been enslaved and spoke several indigenous languages, including Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and Maya. Her linguistic abilities were invaluable, acting as a vital bridge between Cortés and the various indigenous groups he encountered. Without her, direct communication would have been impossible, leading to misunderstandings and potentially disastrous conflicts. Doña Marina was not just a translator, she was a cultural interpreter, explaining the nuances of Aztec society, their political rivalries, and their belief systems to Cortés. This insider knowledge allowed him to navigate the complex political landscape of Mesoamerica with remarkable skill. Her contributions illustrate the profound impact that individuals can have on historical events, particularly when bridging vast cultural and linguistic divides. From a scientific perspective, her linguistic fluidity highlights the incredible capacity of the human brain for language acquisition and the complex neural pathways involved in multilingualism. Her role allowed Cortés to exploit the deep-seated resentments of tributary states against the Aztec Empire. The Tlaxcalans, a fierce and independent people who had long resisted Aztec domination, became his most crucial allies. This alliance, forged through diplomacy and a shared enemy, would provide Cortés with thousands of indigenous warriors, far outnumbering his own Spanish forces. This strategic alliance was a testament to Cortés's political acumen and Doña Marina's indispensable role in facilitating it, setting the stage for the march towards Tenochtitlan. The march inland. With his ships scuttled and crucial alliances formed, Cortés began his audacious march inland towards the legendary city of Tenochtitlan. His force was a peculiar sight, a relatively small contingent of Spanish soldiers, equipped with steel armor, swords, arquebuses, early firearms, and a few small cannons, marching alongside thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, adorned in their traditional battle regalia. The journey itself was arduous, traversing diverse and challenging terrain, from humid coastal lowlands to cooler, higher altitudes. This environmental shift would have presented physiological challenges for both the Europeans and the indigenous allies, demonstrating the human body's adaptability, albeit with varying degrees of success. The environmental science of the region played a significant role, with different ecosystems presenting unique challenges for travel, sustenance, and military logistics. Despite these difficulties, the Spanish maintained their discipline, showcasing their military training and organization. The psychological impact of their horses, unknown to the indigenous populations, cannot be overstated. These powerful beasts, capable of carrying heavily armed riders into battle, would have appeared terrifying and almost supernatural to those who had never seen them before. The thundering sound of their hooves, their speed, and their sheer physical presence instilled fear and disrupted traditional battle formations. As Cortés advanced, he encountered the city of Cholula, a major religious center and an important ally of the Aztecs. What transpired there remains one of the most controversial and brutal episodes of the conquest, the Cholula massacre. According to Spanish accounts, Cortés received intelligence, purportedly from Doña Marina, that the Cholulans were planning an ambush in collaboration with Aztec forces. Whether this plot was real or fabricated remains a subject of historical debate, but Cortés acted decisively and mercilessly. He gathered the Cholulan nobles and warriors in a temple courtyard under the guise of a meeting. Then, at a prearranged signal, his Spanish soldiers and Tlaxcalan allies fell upon them, slaughtering thousands of unarmed people. This act of extreme violence served multiple purposes for Cortés. Psychologically, it sent a chilling message to any potential resistors about the ruthlessness of the Spanish and their allies. Militarily, it eliminated a significant potential threat and further solidified the loyalty of his Tlaxcalan forces, who harbored deep animosity towards Cholula. From a social science perspective, the massacre highlights the brutal tactics employed in early modern warfare and the devastating consequences of cultural clashes and political opportunism. The event demonstrated Cortés's willingness to use extreme violence to achieve his objectives, foreshadowing the even greater violence that would accompany the eventual siege of Tenochtitlan. The sheer scale of the massacre, even if numbers are debated, indicates a systematic and deliberate act of terror. This horrific incident underscored the stark differences in warfare ethics and cultural norms between the Europeans and some indigenous groups, and it profoundly shaped the perceptions of both sides as they continued their fateful march towards the Aztec capital. Montezuma's dilemma. As Cortés and his formidable army, now swelled by thousands of Tlaxcalan warriors, drew closer to Tenochtitlan, the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II found himself in an agonizing dilemma. Imagine the immense pressure on him. He was the divine ruler of a vast empire, accustomed to deference and tribute, now confronted with an unprecedented threat. Accounts describe Montezuma as a deeply religious man, heavily influenced by the omens and prophecies that had been circulating. The arrival of the Spaniards, with their pale skin, bearded faces, and the powerful beasts they rode, resonated with certain Aztec myths, particularly those concerning the return of the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl, who was prophesied to return from the east. While modern historians largely debunk the idea that Montezuma genuinely believed Cortés was Quetzalcoatl, the myth certainly contributed to a climate of fear and uncertainty. Montezuma's initial responses were a series of wavering decisions. He sent emissaries with rich gifts of gold and silver, hoping to appease the newcomers and encourage them to leave. This strategy, however, backfired spectacularly. The gifts only fueled the Spanish lust for gold, confirming the immense wealth of the Aztec Empire and strengthening Cortés's resolve to reach the capital. From a behavioral science perspective, Montezuma's actions can be seen as an attempt to mitigate risk through appeasement, a common strategy in intergroup conflict, but one that proved disastrous in this specific context due to the fundamentally different motivations of the two parties. Despite the warnings and the mounting evidence of Spanish aggression, Montezuma ultimately chose to allow Cortés and his forces to enter Tenochtitlan peacefully. This decision, seemingly inexplicable in hindsight, was likely driven by a complex interplay of factors: religious uncertainty, a desire to avoid open conflict within his sacred city, and perhaps a miscalculation of the Spaniards' true intentions and capabilities. He may have believed he could control the newcomers once they were within his city's walls, or that their numerical inferiority made them less of a direct military threat than they truly were. As Cortés and his small band of Spaniards, accompanied by their Tlaxcalan allies, marched across the causeways leading into Tenochtitlan, they were met with a sight that must have left them utterly stunned. Descriptions from Spanish chroniclers speak of a city more magnificent than any they had ever seen. The causeways were wide and perfectly paved, flanked by shimmering canals teeming with canoes. Massive pyramids pierced the sky, their temples adorned with intricate carvings and vibrant colors. The sheer scale of the city, its architectural grandeur, and the bustling activity of its hundreds of thousands of inhabitants must have been an awe-inspiring spectacle. This moment represented the pinnacle of Aztec civilization, meeting the vanguard of European expansion. The psychological impact of such a sight on the Spanish, who had come from smaller, less advanced European cities, would have been immense. It confirmed the rumors of immense wealth and power, further fueling their ambition, but also highlighting the daunting challenge that lay before them. Montezuma's decision to welcome them, intended as a gesture of peace or control, would instead open the gates to the unraveling of his empire. Inside Tenochtitlan. The entrance of the Spanish into Tenochtitlan in November 1519 was a moment of profound historical significance, a meeting of two entirely distinct worlds. The initial encounter between Cortés and Montezuma, described in both Spanish and indigenous accounts, was steeped in ceremony and suspicion. Montezuma, carried on a litter adorned with gold and feathers, met Cortés on one of the main causeways. The exchange of gifts and pleasantries masked a deep undercurrent of apprehension on both sides. Cortés, ever the shrewd strategist, quickly assessed the situation. He recognized the city's unique geography. An island connected by causeways made it both a marvel and a potential trap. His small force, while armed with superior technology, was numerically insignificant compared to the Aztec population. He knew that open conflict at this stage would be suicidal. His primary objective was to control Montezuma, the symbolic and actual head of the empire, thereby effectively seizing control of the entire state apparatus without a direct military confrontation. The Spanish were housed in the palace of Axayacatl, Montezuma's father, an impressive complex that offered both comfort and a defensible position within the heart of the city. From a logistical and strategic perspective, this placement was critical for the Spanish. It provided them with a base of operations and a degree of security in an otherwise overwhelming environment. Cortés's next audacious move was to take Montezuma hostage. Under the pretense of holding him accountable for an attack on Spanish forces near Veracruz, which may or may not have been true, Cortés and a small group of his men confronted Montezuma in his palace and forced him to move into the Spanish quarters. This act of lèse-majesté, of seizing the sacred emperor, sent shockwaves through the Aztec hierarchy. While ostensibly still ruling, Montezuma became a puppet, forced to issue decrees and provide gold to his captors. This brilliant psychological coup effectively decapitated the Aztec leadership without firing a single shot in open battle within the city. From a political science perspective, it demonstrates the vulnerability of centralized hierarchical power structures when their apex is compromised. The Aztec system, reliant on the emperor's divine authority, was particularly susceptible to this kind of attack. During this period, Cortés continued to gather intelligence, meticulously studying the city's defenses, its resources, and the political sentiments of the populace. He also began a remarkable engineering feat, constructing brigantines, small sailing ships, within the city itself. These ships, built from materials salvaged from his scuttled vessels and new timber, would prove crucial in controlling Lake Texcoco during the eventual siege. This act symbolized the Spanish technological superiority and their capacity for adaptation. While the Aztecs were masters of canoe building, the concept of a sail-driven warship was entirely alien. The presence of these vessels, built with the forced labor of Aztec artisans, would eventually give the Spanish a decisive advantage, turning the very waters that protected Tenochtitlan into a highway for its destruction. The Noche Triste. While Cortés was away dealing with an expedition sent to arrest him, led by Pánfilo de Narváez, he left his notoriously hot-headed lieutenant, Pedro de Alvarado, in charge of the Spanish garrison in Tenochtitlan. Alvarado, known for his rash decisions and brutality, quickly plunged the city into chaos. During the annual Tlaxcala festival, a major religious celebration where thousands of Aztec nobles and warriors gathered in the great temple plaza, Alvarado ordered his men to attack. This unprovoked massacre, known as the Massacre in the Great Temple, was a catastrophic miscalculation. The Spanish, fearing a rebellion, or simply driven by a desire to suppress Aztec religious practices, slaughtered unarmed celebrants. From a sociological and anthropological perspective, this act demonstrates a profound misunderstanding and disrespect for Aztec culture and religion. It was not merely a military action. It was a desecration of their sacred space and a brutal assault on their social and political elite. The massacre instantly shattered any lingering illusion of peace or benign intentions on the part of the Spanish. The Aztecs, fueled by outrage and a thirst for vengeance, rose up in open rebellion, besieging the Spanish quarters. The city, once peaceful, erupted into a furious battleground. This sudden and violent uprising caught the Spanish completely off guard, demonstrating the immense power of a unified populace driven by extreme grievance. Cortés, having successfully defeated Narvaez and absorbed many of his men and supplies, returned to Tenochtitlan to find his garrison under siege and the city in full revolt. The situation was dire. The Aztecs, now unified in their resistance, launched relentless attacks. Cortés attempted to use Montezuma to calm his people, forcing the emperor to address his subjects from a rooftop. However, the crowd, enraged by the massacre and the perceived betrayal of their emperor, pelted Montezuma with stones and arrows. Montezuma, whether from his wounds or from a broken spirit, died shortly after, a deeply contested event, with Spanish accounts claiming he was killed by his own people, while indigenous accounts suggest he was murdered by the Spanish. His death removed any lingering hope of a peaceful resolution or a return to the previous status quo. Recognizing the futility of holding their position, Cortés decided to make a desperate attempt to break out of the city under the cover of darkness. This night, July 1st, 1520, became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies attempted to escape across the causeways, but they were discovered. The Aztecs launched a ferocious attack, swarming them with canoes and raining down arrows and spears. The causeways, designed to protect the city, now became deadly bottlenecks. Many Spanish soldiers, burdened by the gold they tried to carry, drowned in the lake. The retreat was a chaotic and bloody disaster. Cortés lost a significant portion of his men, horses, and cannon, and almost his own life. This military defeat, a stark contrast to their previous successes, demonstrated the formidable power of Aztec resistance when united and fighting on their own ground. From a military science perspective, it highlights the importance of logistics, retreat planning, and the dangers of urban warfare against a numerically superior and motivated foe. The Noche Triste was a brutal awakening for the Spanish, proving that the conquest of Tenochtitlan would be far more difficult and costly than they had initially imagined. Rebuilding and retribution. After the devastating Noche Triste, Cortés and his shattered forces, accompanied by their loyal Tlaxcalan allies, limped back to Tlaxcala, their primary indigenous stronghold. This was arguably Cortés's lowest point, but his resilience and determination were remarkable. Despite heavy losses, he managed to regroup, tend to his wounded, and critically, maintain the loyalty of his Tlaxcalan allies. This loyalty was a testament to Cortés's diplomatic skills and the deep-seated animosity the Tlaxcalans held for the Aztecs. They saw a shared enemy and a chance to finally break free from Aztec hegemony. Scientifically, the ability of the Spanish to recover from such a catastrophic defeat speaks to their superior organizational skills, their military discipline, and their access to a technological base that allowed for resupply and reinforcement, albeit slowly. While suffering from wounds and psychological trauma, the core of the Spanish fighting force remained intact, and their leaders, particularly Cortés, refused to be broken. Their determination to return and conquer Tenochtitlan only intensified after their humiliating defeat. The Noche Triste transformed the conquest from a relatively swift infiltration into a prolonged, brutal war of attrition. During the months that Cortés spent regrouping and planning his next assault, an invisible and far more devastating weapon was unleashed upon the Aztec Empire: smallpox. Unbeknownst to the Spanish, one of Narvaez's African slaves had arrived in Veracruz carrying the smallpox virus. The disease, to which Europeans had developed some immunity over centuries, was entirely new to the Americas. The indigenous populations had no natural resistance, and the virus spread like wildfire through the densely populated cities, including Tenochtitlan. The epidemiological impact was catastrophic. Smallpox, a highly contagious viral disease, causes high fever, severe skin lesions, and often death. Without immunity, entire communities were decimated. The death toll was staggering, estimated to be in the millions across Mesoamerica, perhaps reducing the Aztec population by 50 to 90%. From a biological and medical science perspective, this was a classic virgin soil epidemic, where a pathogen is introduced into a population with no prior exposure or immunity. The impact on the Aztec social fabric was immense. Leaders, priests, and warriors succumbed to the disease, creating a vacuum of leadership and severely weakening the empire's ability to resist. The psychological effect was equally profound, as the Aztecs witnessed their people dying in droves from a mysterious and horrifying ailment that spared the Spanish. This unintentional biological warfare played a more significant role in the fall of the Aztec Empire than any steel sword or cannon. It fundamentally undermined their ability to defend themselves, both militarily and socially, paving the way for Cortés's return and eventual triumph. The smallpox epidemic was a silent, relentless killer that decimated the very population Cortés sought to conquer, ironically making his eventual victory far less of a military challenge. The Siege of Tenochtitlan. Having regrouped, reinforced, and witnessed the devastating effects of smallpox on the Aztec population, Cortés launched his final decisive campaign against Tenochtitlan in May 1521. This was no longer a stealthy infiltration, but a full-scale siege, a brutal war of attrition. Cortés had learned from the Noche Triste and meticulously planned his assault. He brought back his Tlaxcalan allies, numbering in the tens of thousands, and crucially, deployed the brigantines he had painstakingly constructed. These small, maneuverable sailing ships, armed with cannons, were critical for controlling Lake Texcoco. They could intercept Aztec war canoes, bombard shoreline defenses, and transport troops and supplies around the lake, effectively cutting off Tenochtitlan's lifelines. From a naval warfare perspective, the brigantines represented a significant technological advantage, allowing the Spanish to control the vital waterways surrounding the island city. The Aztecs, under their new and courageous emperor, Cuauhtémoc, Montezuma's nephew, fought with desperate valor. They fortified the city, dug trenches, and continually harassed the Spanish and their allies. Their ingenuity in adapting their fighting techniques to counter Spanish weaponry was remarkable, but ultimately insufficient. The siege was a grinding, house-to-house and causeway-by-causeway battle. Cortés employed a brutal strategy. He systematically destroyed the city as he advanced, leveling buildings and filling in canals to create open ground for his cavalry and artillery. This scorched-earth tactic served multiple purposes. Militarily, it eliminated Aztec defensive positions and allowed the Spanish to move more freely. Psychologically, it was designed to break the will of the defenders, showing them that their magnificent city was being systematically obliterated. From an urban planning and engineering perspective, this destruction was a tragic reversal of the Aztecs' incredible architectural achievements. The very infrastructure that had made Tenochtitlan a marvel was now being weaponized against it. The supply lines to the city were completely cut off, leading to widespread starvation and thirst among the besieged population. The stench of death from the unburied bodies, combined with the lack of clean water, led to outbreaks of disease, further compounding the misery caused by smallpox. The sheer scale of human suffering during the siege was immense. The Spanish and Tlaxcalan forces relentlessly pushed deeper into the city, slowly but inexorably tightening their grip. The fighting was fierce and bloody, with heavy casualties on both sides, but the combination of Spanish technology, strategic alliances, and the devastating impact of disease and starvation ultimately proved overwhelming. Cuauhtémoc, demonstrating immense courage, refused to surrender, even as his city lay in ruins around him. The fall and legacy. After 93 days of relentless fighting, starvation, and disease, Tenochtitlan finally fell on August 13th, 1521. The last pockets of Aztec resistance, led by the indomitable Emperor Cuauhtémoc, were cornered in the Tlatelolco district. Even then, they refused to yield, fighting to the last breath. Spanish accounts describe the utter devastation of the city, buildings reduced to rubble, canals choked with bodies, and the air thick with the smell of death and smoke. The final assault was a brutal, merciless affair, with little quarter given. Cuauhtémoc was eventually captured, attempting to escape in a canoe. His capture signaled the definitive end of the Aztec Empire. The immediate aftermath was a period of horrific looting, violence, and systematic destruction. The Spanish and their indigenous allies, particularly the Tlaxcalans, exacted a terrible revenge for decades of Aztec dominance. The scale of the bloodshed and suffering was immense, a tragic end to one of the greatest civilizations of the Americas. From a military history perspective, the siege of Tenochtitlan remains one of the most remarkable and brutal urban sieges in history, a testament to both the strategic brilliance of Cortés and the incredible resilience of the Aztec defenders. The fall of the city marked a profound geopolitical shift, ending centuries of indigenous autonomy in Mesoamerica and ushering in a new era of Spanish colonial rule. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just the end of an empire, it was the beginning of a new world, a syncretic blend of indigenous and European cultures that would eventually form modern Mexico. The Spanish quickly began to dismantle the physical and spiritual heart of the Aztec Empire. On the ruins of Tenochtitlan, they began to build Mexico City, transforming the grand Aztec capital into a colonial Spanish metropolis. Temples were torn down, their stones repurposed for churches and government buildings. The intricate causeways and canals were filled in, altering the very geography of the city. The indigenous population was subjected to forced labor, conversion to Catholicism, and the imposition of a new social and political order. However, the Aztec legacy did not simply vanish. Much of it was incorporated, often forcibly, into the new colonial society. Indigenous languages, traditions, and even certain deities persisted, often disguised or syncretized with Catholic practices. The scientific achievements of the Aztecs, particularly in agriculture and medicine, continued to influence colonial practices. The conquest had a profound and lasting impact on global history. It ushered in the era of European colonization of the Americas, leading to the exchange of plants, animals, diseases, and technologies known as the Columbian Exchange. This exchange fundamentally reshaped global ecosystems, economies, and demographics. The wealth extracted from the Americas, particularly silver, fueled the rise of the Spanish Empire and global trade networks. The story of the Aztec conquest is a complex and often painful one, a testament to the clash of civilizations, the power of technological superiority, the devastating impact of disease, and the enduring resilience of human culture. It reminds us of the fragility of empires and the profound and often violent consequences when vastly different worlds collide. While the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan may have been destroyed, its spirit and legacy continue to resonate, shaping the identity of a nation and serving as a powerful reminder of a pivotal moment in human history.